was recently asked by a local person to paint a Goliath Scorpion clan mech. Well, actually, Empire Scorpion, Scorpion Empire. I actually don't know the lore of this group very well, but I really like this tan sand color scheme. So here's the two schemes they were desiring for me to paint, and I chose the red one because it's kind of cool. It has this kind of rust red mixed in with the tan, and it reminds me a lot of this. And I painted these as a kid, and this is kind of like my redemption of painting this once again. I have some Terminators, and I hope to do those in a month or so, painting this same style, so look forward to that. Now, I was just looking at some nature and kind of like how I wanted to approach this, because I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm not going to do the typical bright bleached bone with the brown shading just in the recesses. I'm going to do more of a brown from underneath building up to that bone white. So just a few examples what I'm kind of getting this idea from, and granted this is not going up to that bleach bone, but you see how it's building up to brown to the highest points, and I have no idea what kind of owl this is, but it's really cool looking. And I just found this picture of leaves, and they're kind of the same concept. You see at the very top you have that kind of like bleached, well, it's not bleached bone, but it's kind of that same like khaki sand color building up from the dark browns. So that's my inspiration. Let's dive into painting the Scorpion Empire, Goliath Scorpion Clan, and let's jump in now. We're starting with a base of charred brown, and this was primed with a gray color. So the base coat is starting with this model color charred brown. The first kind of build up I'm using is the leather brown from Vallejo, and this sponge is decently heavy with the paint for the first round. Next, I'm using that leather brown, but I'm mixing a little bit of that P3 Minoth white, which is kind of just like the Citadel bleached bone color. And I start by adding 10% of that bleached bone Minoth white, and I'm slowly building up to 20, 30, 40, and 50%. So I can start building up that gradient, but I'm really working on making sure I get the dark undertones right with this, because if they're not right and I jump straight to that bright bleached bone look, it's just gonna really be kind of like, it's just gonna stand out too harshly compared to that brown undertone. So I really want to build it up. And you'll notice the brighter I go with the paint, the more I'm trying to take off from the makeup sponge. This kind of ensures that I don't put too much of the brightest paint on the tips, because I'm trying to build up that gradient from deep brown all the way up to a brighter highlight to the very top. At this point, I believe I am at 50-50 with the leather brown and then that Minoth white, and I really want to start hitting just the tops, and I'm trying to leave the darker brown undertone completely untouched. Okay, we are moving to brighter colors now, so I'm trying to take off as much as I can from this makeup sponge, because I'm kind of afraid of ruining the gradient I've spent so much time building up. But patience is a virtue. I'm slowly building up to the highest point of color. So I believe now I'm at about 90% of that mid-off white and 10% of the leather brown. Now finally using the Minoth bone white just by itself. This has been a process. It's taken a while to build this up, but I feel like this was worth it. There was a lot of hard work building up to this color. Now I can safely use the brightest color without ruining the undertones. And I'm throwing this out. If you have anything to share about this group, please drop it in the comments. All I know is from someone shared on Reddit that they seek relics. I wish I had time to dive into their lore this week, but please share in the comments what you know. Next, I'm gonna use this ivory white from Model Color and just hit those little points of armor that would hit by the light. I'm trying not to ruin the undertone that I've done with that bleach bone, but just trying to find those certain spots of the armor that the sun would be hitting the armor. Now I want to add a bit of a glaze, so I'm using the same two colors I used, but I'm using this as a glaze and it's decently watered down, and I'm just trying to smooth out some of those transitions from the dark to the light, because when I looked at the model closely, the transition was still a bit harsh from the bright color to the dark. So I'm just trying to hit this in some of those areas and kind of using that glaze to smooth it out. And should be doing a video on this more in depth about glazing, because I believe glazing has been confusing for me when I was first starting out, and using it in this way makes it so much easier to make those transitions when you're building from a bright color to a dark. Next, I'm going to use lead belcher and just going to pick out all those metal parts on the model. And I think I did this previously on that BattleTech Gothic. I'm not hitting as much metal as I typically would. I feel like I've overdone the metal, but in this case I'm just doing a little bit just so I can really have the white armor or bone armor to be kind of like the star of this model. Now, the color I'm using to pick out the reds is this dark red from Model Color, and I'm being very careful not to hit it on those whites that I've built up, so just careful brush control. And again, if you kind of made that mistake by hitting it, it wouldn't be that hard to cover up, but yes, like always, I keep saying, just be careful. And I really don't know where I'm putting these. I was looking online at different awesome mechs. Awesome, I know the name of the mech is awesome, and seeing where their highlights were for the secondary color. So I'm just kind of choosing where I'm putting it and thinking what would look the best. Next, I'm going to start shading. So I'm going to use Nolan oil on the metal parts, and then I will use Agrex Earth Shade on the reds. But on the reds, I'm being very careful not to completely wash over. I'm just going in the recesses, and then there's some places where I kind of do like use it more like a glaze to build up a little bit of the dark shade undertones, but really don't want to overwash this because I feel like I've overwashed in the past and it ruins it. I'm using this red rust from AK mixed with the white spirits so it flows really easy through the crevices, and I'm not washing the whole model with this, but just really being careful that I hit just the recesses because I don't want it to be like grim dark, but I want it to have this like reddish orangey undertone of that kind of sandy desert feel. So maybe this is kind of like a pin wash of this shade, but not really a pin wash, but I feel like I'm doing that. Now I put white spirits on the makeup sponge, and I'm just going to clean up any areas where that red rust came up on the whites. So I feel like I dipped the sponge into the white spirits and then I squeezed it out a little bit. So there's a little bit of white spirits on there, but enough that I can feel it on the sponge. This has been a lot of work, but it is looking good. Now it's time to work on those edge highlights. The first edge highlight I'm going to do on the white bleached white armor is this ivory from model color mixed with the Menoth white. And as I've said in my past videos, I'm more of a minimalistic kind of person when it comes to edge highlighting. I don't like hitting every single corner, but I like to hit a lot of those corners where I've built up that gradient to the highest point. And if you're interested in more of an in-depth kind of highlighting like this, let me know in the comments because I feel like it's a big pain point. I know when I was first starting, even about a year ago, I was still struggling with edge highlights. I was making these uneven blops many times. So let me know and how I can possibly do a video moving forward. And finally, I'm using the ivory white just on the main tops of the armor. So I'm not going over the previous highlight that I've done, but just hitting either in the center of the panel or on just the corners of the panels where the light would hit. To highlight the reds, I'm using dark vermilion from Model Color, And I'm only doing one highlight on this red because I want it to sell as dark, but I also don't want to overdo this highlight. So I'm just trying to be very careful, and I believe I've put a decent amount of water in it, of this paint, just so I don't overdo it, because I'm afraid of not letting that dark red sell. To highlight the metals, I'm using Model Air aluminum, and I'm being very careful because I don't want to overdo this highlight either. I feel like that's the whole idea, this whole video. I'm trying to do highlights, but in an extremely careful way. And finally, I want to do some chipping on armor. And if you haven't done chipping before, you can use any kind of like packaging sponge, but make sure you take off a lot of the paint and do it in like light, like very lightly, and let those chips kind of build up naturally. And it should work. Be patient and don't blob it on too quickly. Last details, the base, varnishing, and a little bit of regimental numbers. I actually don't know what those numbers stand for. I really need to brush up on my BattleTech lore. I feel like I know more about mercenaries and random tidbits of like the overarching history. And there we have it. The awesome is looking awesome. I love this thing. Let me know what you guys think. I feel like this could work in many cases, even when it comes to 40K models. I'm going to possibly do more of these because I really like how this thing turned out. So I'm really stoked to do the same style again. And I want to take the time to thank everyone who has tuned in so far. Here's a little bit of what I've been working on so far since starting the channel. Things are coming. I really appreciate everyone who has been listening and following these videos. Let me know in the comments what you might want and what kind of units you would want me to paint Mech Warrior or 40K. I have also some Infinity the game models sitting on my shelf to paint, and possibly a few others. So hope you guys have a fantastic upcoming week, and thank you so much for tuning in to The Painted Topher.